everybody. Welcome back to the Occulture show with me, Lilith Dorsey, and my co-host. I don't know what side they're on.
Let's try this side. I'm Jason Winslade, and this is the latest episode of Occulture, and we are looking back and looking, well, not forward, but we're looking back further in the past, but also just last fall. What are we talking about
Yes.
today?
Rosemary's Baby, the cult and not so cult classic. The original film was 1968. We're also going to be taking a look at Apartment 7A, which is the prequel that came out last fall, as Jason just mentioned. And there's so much in this film. I was thinking this morning, I'm sad that I didn't live in a world before Rosemary's Baby, because we were born the same year, which was after Rosemary's Baby came out in 68. I won't say exactly how many years, but that to me, I feel like it defined this connection between witches and Satanists. There's so much in this movie, like the Polanski of it, the Ruth Gordon of it, all of that together. And I think I was really also taken aback in a lot of ways by Apartment 7A in a good way. And that's why I suggested to you that we do it. I'm wearing this show like a badge of honor because if I'm correct, you told me you had never seen Rosemary's Baby.
I was very aware of it when I was a kid. That was it was often on TV, and now seeing the original version, I'm like, oh, they must have cut the hell out of that movie with all the nudity and stuff. But I was very aware of it, and I remember seeing parts of it, but I never really sat through the whole thing. And it's funny you say that it solidified that witchcraft Satanism connection, because I believe I remember reading that the author of the book that was pretty closely based on Ira 11 had said at one point that he sort of blamed himself for the rise of fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, as a response to the book and the movie. So its impact was incalculable in terms of the public perception of witchcraft and Satanism. Of course, obviously that connection goes back a few hundred years,
Sure.
but it's just in terms of modern pop culture. And so I decided to wear my best 70s Satanist outfit with my corduroy jacket, turtleneck, and hippie crystal. So, well, I guess 60s Satanists would be the thing. So yeah, it was interesting. I'd never seen the whole thing. Again, very aware of it, and from the get go, I realized what a quintessential New York story this is. To the point where they've named the prequel the apartment number. That it's all about the Dakota. It's all about how that building looked from the outside, and it does. The Dakota does kind of look a bit satanic, to be honest.
It's totally ominous, I mean, for those viewers of you who don't know, I grew up in New York City, and I remember seeing it when I was a kid. I was a tiny kid, like 23 pounds when I was 4 years old. And I remember looking up at this looming giant thing on Central Park West and 72nd. And it just looks so creepy and so freaky and so magical and all of those things like together. And I don't know what homework you did, but I did some homework on the Dakota because I was like, wait a minute, I bet it's haunted. And it is haunted. So the Dakota is where Mark David Chapman shot John Lennon. And, again, growing up, that was something I was very aware of, being a New York City kid. And, who could not know about the Beatles, But so the Dakota, when we go back, it is haunted. It's haunted supposedly by, this is why I said I couldn't read my notes, supposedly by one of the designers of it, one of the creators, Edward Clark, who runs around taking off his wig and shaking it at people who live in the Dakota. There's also supposed to be a John Lennon ghost that people see there. There's also a young blonde girl in a yellow dress with a red ball that she throws down the stairs all the time, which also sounds creepy AF. So it certainly has this history of creepiness just with the building. And I think that you're right. It was very smart of them to have it be called Apartment 7A because it really is the prequel. We get a tiny slice of it in Rosemary's Baby, and then Apartment 7A, we get to go back and find out the real story about what happened before, Rosemary had her baby.
And of course, it's in the film it's the Bamford, and they only, I think they had those exterior shots, those like really great helicopter exterior shots of the Dakota, but they actually, of course, they filmed in soundstage in L.A. So they didn't really film in the Dakota, as far as I know. But yeah, both properties are very much about New York living and what it is to make it in New York, and that connection to acting and performing and dance. That's a huge part of both films. We can draw a lot of parallels between Rosemary Woodhouse and Terry D'Onofrio, and a lot of contrast too. And both sort of, female figures are very much of their time in terms of when the film was made, not just, the 60s. But there's clearly a large connection between not only making it in terms of career, a successful career on stage, but in terms of living situation, and what it is to live that New York dream, to have that nice apartment, in New York. And I wonder what the price differences are between that apartment in the 60s and now, but probably,
You don't even want to know. That's yeah.
thousands of dollars. But yeah, so it's a very quintessential New York story, not just in terms of New York, New York. If I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. But also what it is to live in New York, and and attempt to raise a family in the one, or to you know not raise a family in the other. Um,
It's a
and
single girl in the city story. That's especially the Terry D'Onofrio one. But you're right. There is that connection because Terry's a dancer and Rosemary's husband is an actor, and they seem to have all these connections to the theater world. So that's, again, there's a commentary on entertainment and theater and New York and all of those things.
yeah,
Satan lives there.
all those
Yeah.
all those Satanists that do those things to get the parts. The understudy sees the stage after the unfortunate lead actor twists their ankle, and that's like the oldest Broadway story ever. And this kind of puts it in a different light of like, oh, I wonder why the lead twisted their ankle. You know? It must be Satan.
Yeah, it must be Satan. But no, I think it's interesting. I also think it's interesting, some of these trappings that they use in Rosemary's Baby and Apartment 7A. You've got the herbalism, the tannis root. I think it's interesting that when Terry's got her ankle, I rewatched it again this morning. Terry's got her ankle all messed up and everything, and then she gets this salve to rub on it, and it's mint and other things. But we've got this whole kind of demons coming through the medicine. But I did think it was weird because my goddaughter just got back from Peru, and she said she had some sort of frog psychedelic that they rubbed into her ankle. And I'm watching this scene, and I'm like, huh. I want it because it looks like there are psychedelics that are happening in there. There's not just tranquilizers that are happening and healing things that are happening. There's also really weird stuff because they're tripping, maybe because of Satan, maybe because of the herbs.
Well, it's coming at that time when uh, you know the whole idea of alternative healing methods and herbal medicine and all that is bursting onto the scene, and some people are terrified of it, and it's sort of building on those fears. And it's clearly a time in which that is a thing. And so I was looking at tannis root, right? Tannis root's not a thing. It's
Not a
actually,
thing.
and I was thinking, because they're they had that thing about anagrams, and I was like, oh, tannis.
Yeah, there we go. It's for Satan.
um, so yeah, there's a lot of that sense from the very beginning, like, oh, she grew herbs in her apartment. There must be something off about that. And the funny thing is that prequel that answers that question of what happened
Yes.
to Mrs. Gardenia, in the previous, why she might have blocked off that closet.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
the other thing too I was thinking about was that so much of the film, both films are, it's about those interjoining spaces, which has that kind of, like, when we talk about like sort of like demonic interior design, right? That it's all these interlocking spaces, and the very fact that there is literally a lack of boundaries
Mm-hmm.
that is the almost the root of that horror, that these people can come in at any time and mess with you, even though they're claiming to be friendly. And it's funny because I had a landlady once who was like, they thought of the building as their home, and so they would just use their key
Yeah,
and be
walk
like,
right in.
"No, what are
Great.
you doing?" Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's horrifying. The sense that there's people who could do that are your friends and neighbors and people who are pretending at least to take care of you, and then like you know the people often talk about in Rosemary's Baby how simple acts like frying up meat or making a rotary phone call are filled with terror. It's like this the mundane becomes horrific, and that's a big
Yes.
part of I think both films. Yeah,
The thing that really struck me about that was it wasn't just New York City living, it was city living in the sense of, you're right, like the boundaries are all messed up. I love that scene where you can see the shadows of the satanic ritual above their bed, with the chanting and everything like
right.
that. There's always this kind of, and now that I own the place next door, I can do this. There's always this kind of thought of like, what's on the other side of the wall?
Yeah,
It could be, it looks like a nice little old couple, but they could be Satanists, impregnating poor young junkie girls with Satan's baby. You never know. You never know. It could be bed bugs. It could be anything. But there's this lack of, you're right, boundaries, but also an oppression and a lack of safety because of it. Like they're just right there. And they literally are right there in apartment 7A because she comes in and tries to stab her.
yeah. You're right about that. It is about that fear of city living, and as someone who lives in a condo building where I can hear everything that goes on upstairs, and whether they're having their TV on super loud or they're just having a loud conversation or they're using the bathroom, like it's you can hear whatever they do, and that there is something horrifying about that. Um,
Yeah.
but but yeah, that it's funny because I was thinking about how in the prequel in Apartment 7A they have that whole like basement theater that where they do the rituals. And of course, thinking to myself, as a producer and as someone who is constantly looking for venues, my first thought watching that I was like, oh, that's a good space. They could put a big play there, you know. But I don't remember that being a thing in the original movie. I thought they did everything in 7A. I thought they did everything in the Castavet's apartment. Like they just had a big space or something.
No, but there is a scene where she meets Terry in the laundry room and she talks about how creeped out she is about the basement and there's some energy in the basement
Mm.
and like so it's certainly set up as a site or a portal of evil that even when we're dealing with just Rosemary in the first film that we know. And again, I think it really capitalizes on city life. I have been in some of these old apartments that I've had where you would go in the basement and it was literally like 150 years of like creepy stuff coming out the walls and everything.
Oh yeah.
It writes itself, as you would say. But I love those ritual scenes too, and I loved all the dance numbers. It seemed almost like Suspiria to me for parts of
Yeah.
it, you know what I mean? Because we're like in this ecstatic, magical, dangerous dance, literally, that we're getting to see from all angles almost. And then the Busby Berkeley number of the apartment 7A was just fantastic.
Yeah, there's a couple things there that like uh going back to that laundry room scene. That's the one thing that I didn't quite figure out. In that, just to back up a bit, the prequel focuses on Terry D'Onofrio, who's the dancer that Rosemary briefly meets in that laundry room scene in the first movie, who goes on about how the Castevets took her out the street and took care of her and all this stuff. And then she shows up dead from falling out the apartment uh, very early on in the film, and
Spoilers.
that's when Rosemary and her husband meet the Castevets. And so the prequel is that's Terry's story, the dancer's story, and so the one thing that I couldn't get my head around was that in that scene in Rosemary's Baby, she's all about like, she talks about how great the Castevets are and that they saved her life and everything like that. But by the time we see that, they don't actually reproduce the scene in the prequel, but they show that the two of them are crossing paths. And um but by that point in the prequel, Terry's already kind of like, what's going on here? Like, she doesn't really have that sense of naivete at that point in the film. So that doesn't quite line up. But anyway, um, but yeah, part of the
Yeah,
thing
I would have
is
liked that scene. I really would have liked that scene where they had the Rosemary and the Terry
yeah,
character interacting again in apartment 7A. I know, but they end it really like where literally they're walking into the building and that's the first
right,
time they meet them. But I wanted more. I wanted more.
yeah.
And, maybe something in the church or something, that could have worked.
Yeah, there's like, so that performance quality that you mentioned, because I totally thought of Suspiria too, and another film I've only seen parts of, and I've never sat for the
Me
whole
too.
thing, so we'll have to do that one day too. Both the original and the remake. Um, but yeah, there's definitely something about the fact that the because in Rosemary's Baby, Hutch, who's the family friend and landlord, that it's sort of like the voice of reason in that first film. Um, he tells the story of the witch, the male witch who was beaten up in the lobby by the Bamford residents. That turns out to be he turns out to be the father of Roman Castevet, who's the main character, or the main instigator of all that. Roman and his wife, Minnie, played by, of course, the inimitable Ruth Gordon. And Roman is in the theater. He's a writer, and his father was in the theater as well. So there's this production that they're doing that Terry gets the lead in eventually, after she doesn't even make the audition for the chorus at first, and then she gets that and then works her way up, and the awful accents and all that stuff. So in this production, when we finally see some of the number towards the end, and it's almost this like very Metropolis like German expressionist
Yes.
with the headdresses. It's very 20s occult in a way. So there's definitely a theater and dance tradition that it's calling back to. And the most horrifying thing to me about the film, that the prequel, is seeing her injure her foot, because when that happened, I'm watching my partner. We're both like, oh, like, we watch the goriest horror and it's fine, but like that was just too much. And so
It was
she does
painful.
that leap into the void, and she's kind of, so that's kind of her thing with the character, is not sticking the landing, so to speak. And that's what that's what we know about her character from the beginning, is that she falls out of a building. So there's clearly they're playing on that notion of taking that leap, and whether it's a leap of faith or a leap of despair is a whole other question. But yeah, that seeing her injure herself like that is, for any performer,
No,
it's
it was horrible. And even when her rival gets her body all contorted, that was also immensely
oh yeah,
painful for me to watch, like just this kind of thing like that. Since you just brought him up, the Hutch character I want to mention is Maurice Evans. So for those of you who didn't recognize him as the dad from Bewitched, his voice just
oh,
sort of came straight at me when we were doing it.
ooh, he looked familiar.
See, there you go. So there's this sort of witchy history, you know what I mean? And I love the way they use him in that way, the same way he kind of was in Bewitched, as like this paternal authority figure that comes in and has all this knowledge that they really need to help save them. I'm sure there's some sort of screenwriting convention about it, but that I've forgotten. But he does seem to be like this sort of, hero when they need it, coming in and then getting foiled. I'm
Yeah,
surprised
so
he's not black, but anyway.
right, right. Yeah, because there really isn't any equivalent in Apartment 7A. I mean, think about, the original, of course, Roman Polanski directing it, based on the book by Ira Levin, and this prequel was directed by a woman, Natalie Erica James, and co-wrote the screenplay with Christian White, Skylar James story. Not sure if Skylar's man or woman, but it's produced by John Krasinski and his production company that does the Quiet Place movies. So there are women's voices happening in this prequel, and of course both films in one way or the other are about women's oppression in different ways. And what I found fascinating about making that original film, like I was looking to see if there were any like kind of horror stories about how Mia Farrow was treated or whatever, like as happens often with like like Stanley Kubrick and Shelley Duvall and all that crap, like just putting her through
Well,
some.
Polanski's been canceled now, so
Well,
Polanski's on.
well, I mean, for good reason,
Yeah,
but
of course.
but uh, but no, what I found interesting about the Mia Farrow situation was while that was happening, so she was married to Sinatra, right? And Sinatra was a bastard. Like, so she was married to him at the time. He wanted her to quit acting because she was his wife,
The wife. Yep.
and he like stormed onto the set and very publicly humiliated her and served her divorce papers, and she was going to quit. And they convinced her, like, there's Oscar nominations being talked about with this, stick to it. And so she went, divorced her, he divorced her. And so she's being treated like crap by a guy who wants her to play this wife role, while playing this role in which she is raped and controlled and manipulated, into, and one of the more horrifying things to me in that in the film was when Charles Grodin's doctor, that character, you think, he's going to be on her side because he's not part of the conspiracy. He's not a Satanist, but the whole point is that there's no difference. Is that he's
Yes.
just as much, he's just as much about oppressing her as the Satanists are. Like that, that this is endemic, right? That this is all, the women's hysteria. This is all part of like what we need to do to control the women. Now Rosemary wants to, in at least some theory, wants to have a baby, and she, of course, said, eventually gives in and says yes to the baby. Whereas for Terry, she does not want a child. It's going to ruin her career. It's very much about like that fear of being of forced birth, which again, that's happening. That abortion isn't an option. That you can't actually have that right, and so you're forced to become part of this whole thing. And that's, again, that's very much about the fear of this time.
Love that character of the nun going up to Terry and being like, putting her hands on her stomach and saying like, you can't have this baby. I love that image, because here we've got somebody who's a woman, we've got someone who's a Catholic, and even in that moment, she's like, no, you can't have this baby. This will not be good. So I think that for me was really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to I think process culturally around what role Rosemary's Baby played. Of course, you wanted to talk about Dianne Wiest playing the Ruth Gordon.
Yes. Her
Uh,
playing Minnie Castevet is just amazing. It's like epic. I wouldn't have thought somebody could do an equally good job as Ruth Gordon did, but she does. It's like she embodies the character 100%, but she also gives a complete and total homage to Ruth Gordon's original performance. It's just, and so you're talking about a New York story. So New York, so perfect. Like it's like I knew Minnie Castevet. She was sitting
yeah,
there
yeah,
trying to give me cookies. So I I really appreciate her. I really, really do. I think that's one of her best performances ever. I mean, she's amazing anyway, but I think that definitely for this was one of her best performances ever, and one of Ruth Gordon's best performances,
yeah.
her iconic performances. People know this, and they know Harold and Maude. This
She got
this
the
is how
Oscar
they
for this.
remember her.
I'm pretty sure Ruth Gordon got the Oscar for this, Best
Yes.
Supporting Actress for this. Yeah, and Diane V's she did bring a few other things to the role. I think she brought this menace that wasn't necessarily in Ruth Gordon's performance. Ruth Gordon, like, her approach was very interesting, just in terms of acting choices. Like, it was almost like she was casually evil. Like she was just like, oh, this is what we do. Like, which in a way is almost scarier. Whereas
It
there's
is. It
but,
is.
but yeah, Diane Least definitely did a little bit more overtly menacing, like when she's like smiling evilly through the peephole in the door, or like she might give a line like this extra weight and darkness. But Ruth Gordon never did that. She was always very matter of fact, very sort of realistic kind of, almost Stanislavskian
All
approach.
of this took me back to my theater days, my performing days, my New York days, all of that all rolled into one. And for all the Satanistic nonsense and the evil and the, getting possessed by a demon baby, I think there were some things that were I like the matter of factness of it, is what I was going to say, because it's like, oh, and that argument that Roman Castevet has about like, oh, so we have to have your God, or why are we bad because we don't have your God? Like, I mean, there's some definite value in that way of thinking. Now, yes, he was evil, but I'm sure every witch watching this has had to have that conversation about like, why is my religion evil? Because it's not your way. That's not what it's supposed to be. I think now that we have the Church of Satan, which again, we've got so much of that being not just a religious thing, but also a religious freedom thing, right? Like, so I think it was an interesting choice to do Apartment 7A and sort of call back into these old tropes and old ideas that hopefully I think people realize are not true now, and take it for the shock value that it is. But they were both very pretty movies. It's a very beautiful way to say a very evil thing, and I think that was part of the message as well, that evil's seductive, right? The same way fame is seductive and power is seductive, and all of those things that go into it.
Yeah, and as Roman is fond of saying, the year is one. Because the birth of I mean, that kind of the Antichrist sort of mythos is very much about that, the new eon, and even like people who want to connect Crowley's magical child and the Age of Horus and all that kind of stuff, like that was very much in the zeitgeist at the time, as well. So I think a lot of people who were in the audiences at the time, of course, didn't really get those cultural connections. They just thought, Satan, bad, evil. And of course, in that story, that's true. But it is building on what had evolved at that time as culturally significant. And we're just there, obviously, 68, we're just there on the cusp of witchcraft becoming a huge thing on the West Coast with the reclaiming community and all of and Starhawk and all that. But there was definitely an awareness of people like Sybil Leek and all, that whole history is really, you can't really extricate that from the zeitgeist behind Rosemary's Baby. And even though we clearly know where we know what the ending of the prequel is going to be, as we do with most prequels, I still was surprised, and I found that really fascinating, because it was very much about, like I was watching this and I'm like, because she's starting to drink and hail Satan and all that, and I think a part of her is sort of giving in to that, but yet she, is part of her ultimate act of rebellion to jump out that window, and she does it at the climax of a dance piece, and
That
to me,
dance
like
piece was amazing. Like,
that made the film for me. Now, I mean, critically, people were like, it doesn't. It's fine. It's fun. Whatever. It doesn't really add a lot to the mythos, but it's whatever. It was worth watching. Nobody's raving about it, but
no.
for me, that final sequence where it's like she's fully in it now. She's hailing Satan. She's dancing around, and she's really, she's really in it, and it's literally the performance of her lifetime to like
Yeah.
dance at this party, and then boom, out the window, and Minnie's like, ugh, like, I don't know, I thought that was brilliant.
No, I thought it was brilliant too. I think this film is going to end up having cult status or something like that, because it's such a, not to harp on it, and now I'm going to harp on the costumes. It looks pretty, but the costumes are amazing as well. Those Metropolis costumes, the people with the telephones on their head for the costume party. Like, it's just, they're so good. Like, I'm in awe of all of the sequence with the devil scene. Like, all of that is so good. So I think people are going to pick this up in a weird kind of culty type way. I do.
This is a worthy entry in our occult horror archive, as it were.
I mean, it's iconic. That's why I was surprised you hadn't seen it, because for me, growing up, this is what it was, especially in the mainstream. Something you, like you said, it was on television, especially something you were going to see on TV or whatnot. This and The Wizard of Oz is all the only witches you were ever going to see on TV. So thank you so much for watching our show, for listening to us talk about Rosemary's Baby and Apartment 7A, Blasts from the Past, about Satanists and babies and showbiz and all of these kinds of things. Jazz hands. We just have to have an excuse to have jazz hands on the show every
Satanic
week.
jazz hands.
Oh, that's hilarious. But we really appreciate you watching. Please continue to like and comment and subscribe to our channels and follow us on all the socials. We have them now. I think we even have a Blue Sky, yay. And we have a Patreon as well. And we have a couple of people paying us. Yay!
So until next time, keep yourself safe from Satan and politicians and
Tannis
maybe
Root.
tennis root. Beware the tennis root. It smells nasty, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.